Okay. Okay, hi. Welcome to your fourth week of Environmental Biology Online. The weeks just seem to be flying by for me. This week we begin a longer unit on ecosystem ecology. And remember, we talked about ecosystems in the first week of the semester, and that's when we're looking at the non-living parts of an ecosystem and the living parts of the ecosystem, and how those two parts interact. And when we look at ecosystem ecology, mostly what we're thinking about is energy and nutrients. These two things are the drivers of the whole ecosystem, and they're always flowing into organisms and out of organisms, and the way they move is very interesting, and it helps to explain some of the patterns we see with the number of species we have, and things like that. So we're going to be looking at the patterns next week, but this week we're going to focus on energy. And energy comes from the sun, and it's a huge quantity of energy that beams down to Earth. And a lot of that energy is just reflected right back into space. But some of it comes down into Earth and it goes into a plant. And I have a plant right here. The energy goes into the plant, and the plant converts that energy to sugars that the plant can use to do its daily functions. And the process of converting that energy releases a lot of heat. So some of the heat that came originally from the sun goes back into space. Once the sugars are in the plant as sugars, the sugars get broken down and used so the plant can grow, so it can create chemicals. And the process of using up those sugars releases a lot more heat, energy back into the atmosphere. So there's this large quantity of energy that went into the plant, but only a small amount of energy of that original amount that's still in the plant. Okay, so what's in the plant? So what's in the plant is what's available for the next level of organisms, and that is the plant eaters. They're also called primary consumers or herbivores. And the primary consumers have all the energy that's in all the plants available to them. That's the energy that they can eat. Now, a lot of that energy, they just don't eat. But some of the energy, they do eat. And when that energy goes into their bodies, they use a lot of it just so they can move around, so they can grow, so they can digest their food. So a whole bunch of it is just used up. And in the process of using that energy, it's converted to heat out into the atmosphere. So what's actually in the herbivore is only a small amount of the food, only a small amount of the energy that was actually taken into the herbivore to begin with. So we have even less energy in all of the herbivores than we had in all of the plants. So all the energy that's in all of the herbivores is what's available to all of the carnivores. So all of the meat eaters, all of the animals that eat other animals. And so it's not a lot, it's not the same amount of energy that was available to the herbivores, but that energy goes into the carnivores, it's eaten by the hawk, it's eaten by the snake, and the energy that is eaten gets used. A large portion of it is used so that organism can grow, can move, create chemicals to digest its food. And so what's actually in those carnivores is just a small portion of what they ate, because most of the energy was used and released as heat back into the atmosphere. So as you can see, the amount of energy starts very, very large and gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller the higher we go on the food chain. All that energy that isn't in the food chain is released as heat back into the atmosphere. So energy dissipates over time. There's less and less and less. Every time energy is transformed from one form to another, there's less energy than there was before. Okay? Now, nutrients, on the other hand, act in a completely different way. So nutrients enter an organism every time it eats. So plants don't get nutrients from the sun, they get nutrients from the soil. And then when an organism, like a rabbit, eats a plant, it gets energy and nutrients at the same time. But as we've already talked about, the energy, a lot of it gets used and dissipates back into the atmosphere as heat. Now, nutrients behave in a completely different way. Where energy dissipates all the time, it's going back into the atmosphere, back into space, leaving planet Earth. That doesn't happen with nutrients. The amount of nutrients on the Earth stays consistent over time. So it's always the same amount of nutrients. And ideally, an ecosystem maintains its nutrient quantity over time as well. So we'll talk more about nutrients in 2 weeks. But right now, I just want you to understand that energy dissipates over time. There's less and less, and every time energy is transformed. But nutrients don't work that way. This quantity of nutrients stays consistent. So nutrients actually cycle on the earth. They're continually in motion, continually cycling, recycling, following a continuous path around and around. Energy doesn't do that. Energy is continuously added to the system. We're constantly getting new energy from the sun, and that same quantity of energy is constantly leaving planet Earth back into outer space. Okay, so there's a flow of energy and a cycle of nutrients. The primary way you're going to get information about that is to read the Simutext chapter on ecosystem ecology. So it's the first interaction with Simutext, and the ecosystem ecology chapter is kind of long, just to prepare you ahead of time. And it's a little bit more advanced than what I really expect you to know for this class. But I think the information is really good and they explain it very well. So some of you are totally at that level where you're completely ready to absorb ecosystem ecology at this level. And some of you maybe aren't totally ready for it. But what I recommend is to just work through each of the questions as best you can. And you might skip some questions and come back to them later. I recommend using the highlighting and notes in Simutext to try to keep track of what you're learning and what you're not understanding. And don't get upset, don't get worried if you don't understand it all or if it's stressful to you. Just keep moving through. Just say, oh, this is interesting, this is what I'm understanding. Just don't feel pressure to know everything. I want you to get exposed to the information, and we're going to discuss it in the discussion board. So everything I want you to know, we'll discuss in the discussion board, and you'll have opportunities to practice those things. So do your best to answer all of the questions. The other way you're going to get some information is to read Critcher's book. So chapter 6 is a chapter that outlines a huge range of ecology topics, and one of the ones it talks about is energy, and I think Critcher does a pretty good job of doing that, and that's pages 69 through 77. So I recommend reading the whole chapter to get an overview, but if you want to focus your energy, then I would read pages 69 to 77. And then we'll have a discussion. So I have a whole list of questions in the discussion board, and I'd like you to pick a question that no one else has answered. So when you put in the subject line of your post, of your original post, try to make it somehow explain what that question is about, so that when people are choosing questions, they can quickly see which ones have already been chosen. So choose a question that no one has answered yet, and also try to challenge yourself. Pick something that maybe you're not quite sure of. And we'll talk about it in the discussion, so there's absolutely time to revise, and as long as you are fully answering the question to your best ability, you'll get full points, even if it's not correct. The other way to test your understanding is to take a quiz. Just like before, you can immediately find out if your answer is right or not and get some extra information to learn more every time you answer a question. And then you can take the quiz a second time about an hour later, so that gives you time to practice and learn and try to get a better understanding of some of the material. The other thing is to do your home base. So I'm only giving you 1 week to do home base this week, and you're going to go outside in this snowy weather and see if you can see energy flowing. Now, there is energy flowing. It's absolutely happening in some places. Some species out here are still doing photosynthesis. There are species out here who are eating. Energy is totally flowing. So you can pay attention to food webs. Think about who's eating who. You can pay attention to consumers, producers, decomposers. You can try to see net primary productivity. Try to imagine ecosystem respiration. Use the terminology from Simutext and from the Critcher book to go outside and see what you can find. Now, the goal is not to answer all the questions that I laid out for you. The goal is to try to make energy flow in the ecosystem seem real and meaningful to you. And there's no lab this week. Yay! We'll do the lab next week. Okay, I hope you have a super fantastic week. I haven't been able to show you Pickles yet. This is my little friend. Hi, Pickles! You've probably seen him running around in all the videos. Here he is, waiting for me. What a good dog.